At Christmas dinner, my father raised his glass, beaming the way he always did when he wanted everyone to admire Brandon. "Your brother's promotion was incredible," he announced proudly. "So, Alex, when are you finally going to settle down and give us something to celebrate?" A few people chuckled awkwardly. My mother continued serving the ham like nothing had been said. Brandon didn't respond, just observed me with that calculating expression he'd perfected over the years. I put down my knife. "I already did," I said quietly. "Last spring. I got married in May. You all received invitations." The dining room fell into a silence so thick it felt suffocating. Then my mother whispered, "We never received any invitations, sweetheart." So I reached into my jacket pocket, pulled out my phone, and that's when everything they'd been concealing for months finally came to light. Growing up in Austin, Texas, I learned quickly that my family valued appearances above authenticity. Perfect photographs, perfect achievements, perfect narratives to share at the country club. And in every single one of those narratives, Brandon occupied center stage. I wasn't resentful about it as a child. I simply assumed that's how families functioned. One son commanded attention, the other created space for him to shine. By the time we reached our 20s, the pattern had solidified into something immovable, a hierarchy that nobody questioned. My father showcased Brandon's accomplishments like trophies in a display case. His MBA from Stanford, his position at a prestigious investment firm, the engagement to Madison from the prominent Harrison family. Whenever I achieved something, a research grant, a published paper in an environmental journal, my acceptance into a doctoral program, Dad would nod politely and mention that Brandon had just closed another major deal. I didn't fight against it. I adapted. I became skilled at observing, learning, staying quiet, and I became even more proficient at surviving in the shadows. Moving to Portland changed everything, though. Relocating across the country for my research position wasn't defiance, it was survival. I constructed a life there that felt genuine. I found a modest apartment near the university with large windows overlooking the city, papers and research materials scattered across every surface, mornings that smelled like the coffee Sophia made while humming in our tiny kitchen. My work analyzing climate data and coastal erosion patterns might not have impressed the people my father wanted to impress, but it mattered to the scientific community. It made a tangible difference. And Sophia, she perceived me in ways my family never attempted. She listened without judgment. She paid attention to details. She remembered the small things that mattered to me. Her family noticed me too, not because I performed for them, but because they genuinely cared about who I was. The first time Sophia's mother Jennifer embraced me, she didn't release me quickly the way my mother did, as if completing an obligatory task. She actually held me, warm and sincere. She asked detailed questions about my research. She remembered specifics from previous conversations. Her father Thomas did the same. They weren't flawless people, but they were present, engaged, and that was revolutionary for me. So when Sophia proposed during a rainy April evening on the coast, watching the waves crash against the rocks, I accepted without hesitation. We didn't desire an extravagant production. We selected a small venue overlooking the ocean, invited the people who genuinely knew us, kept everything intimate and authentic. The only thing I hoped for, quietly and stubbornly, was that my parents and Brandon would attend, that perhaps for once they'd prioritize me. I designed the invitations myself, had them professionally printed, and shipped them via certified mail with signature confirmation because I understood my family's tendency to overlook things that didn't serve their narrative. I verified addresses multiple times. I monitored tracking numbers obsessively. When everything displayed as delivered and signed for, I allowed myself to relax. Then the silence descended. No phone calls, no messages, not even a casual acknowledgement in the family group text. Weeks elapsed, the wedding came and went, and still nothing. I constructed elaborate explanations to avoid confronting reality. Perhaps the mail service made an error. Perhaps they were planning a surprise visit afterward. Perhaps they were waiting for an appropriate moment to reach out. But somewhere deeper, a darker understanding took root. Someone had deliberately prevented those invitations from being seen. And I didn't comprehend how accurate that instinct was until Christmas Eve. The silence following the wedding didn't simply exist, it expanded, infiltrated every aspect of my existence like a gradual poison. Initially, I waited patiently. People get overwhelmed during busy seasons, I rationalized. They'll reach out eventually. They'll at least inquire why they didn't receive an invitation. But days transformed into weeks, and the quiet evolved into something more substantial, something calculated. I attempted to initiate contact. A call to my mother went directly to voicemail. A text to my father received a brief, "I'll call you back soon," which never materialized. The family group chat, which we'd maintained since my college years, no longer displayed my name among the participants. I wasn't removed dramatically, I was erased silently, efficiently. I mentioned it to Sophia one evening while we prepared dinner, attempting to sound nonchalant. Maybe there's a technical glitch, I suggested, though my voice betrayed my doubt. She dried her hands, looked directly at me, and asked, "Alex, did anyone from your family respond to the invitations at all?" I shook my head slowly. Not a single person. She didn't accuse anyone, she didn't press for details, she simply said, "Let's examine the delivery records." She assisted me in navigating the Postal Service's tracking system, something I wouldn't have known how to access independently. And there it was, the delivery confirmation logs. 4 packages, 4 signatures, all marked as received. The timestamp was unmistakable, April 15th, exactly when I'd sent them. It wasn't an error, it wasn't forgetfulness. Someone had deliberately ensured those invitations never reached their intended recipients. The devastating part was that I already knew who was responsible. I could visualize Brandon standing in the entryway of our childhood home, sorting through mail like he controlled all information flow in that household. He had always functioned as the gatekeeper, the one Mom relied on to manage her calendar, the one Dad asked to handle important correspondence, the one who screened calls and determined what merited interrupting family time. If something passed through that residence, it passed through Brandon's scrutiny first. The more I analyzed the situation, the more the pieces aligned in a pattern that made my chest tighten with anger. He was preparing for his own elaborate December wedding, 400 guests, designer everything, custom arrangements that cost more than most people's annual salary. His entire identity revolved around being the center of attention, the successful son, the golden child. My wedding, even small and understated, had the potential to divert attention from his upcoming celebration. And Brandon never shared the spotlight gracefully. Still, I required concrete evidence, so I retrieved the tracking receipts. I'd preserved all 4 packages, my name as the sender, their Dallas address as the destination, and the signature at the bottom of each confirmation. One I recognized immediately. Brandon's distinctive angular handwriting. I stared at those letters, felt my throat constrict. He hadn't simply forgotten, he hadn't merely misplaced them. He intercepted them deliberately. He ensured nobody in my family knew about my wedding at all. Sophia touched my shoulder. One I recognized immediately. Brandon's distinctive angular handwriting. I stared at those letters, felt my throat constrict. He hadn't simply forgotten, he hadn't merely misplaced them. He intercepted them deliberately. He ensured nobody in my family knew about my wedding at all. Sophia touched my shoulder gently. "Alex, what do you want to do about this?" I didn't have an immediate answer. Rage would have been simpler. Fury would have made sense. But what I experienced was something more profound, something sharp and ancient, a familiar wound reopening after years of careful management. What do you do when the people who raised you actively choose not to acknowledge your existence? Christmas was approaching. I almost declined the invitation, almost allowed them to continue pretending I didn't exist in any meaningful way. But pretending was what constructed this dysfunction in the first place. So I made a different decision. I attended,
and I brought the truth with me. Christmas Eve always appeared flawless from the outside. Crystal decorations, polished silverware, candles creating that perfect holiday ambiance like something from a lifestyle magazine. But the moment I entered through the front door, I felt it. That old, unspoken tension settling across my shoulders like a heavy coat I never requested. Brandon was already positioned near the Christmas tree with Madison, both dressed immaculately, posing for photographs like they were shooting a holiday spread for a luxury magazine. My mother orchestrated the dinner preparations, narrating every detail of Brandon's upcoming wedding to anyone within earshot. My father poured wine methodically, eyes already showing that familiar exhaustion. Not one person inquired about how I'd been. Not one mentioned the wedding they all missed. I took my seat at the table directly across from Brandon. He didn't look at me initially. He didn't need to. Silence can be a strategic performance, and he'd always excelled at performing. Dinner commenced with the predictable script: praise for Brandon's career achievements, his engagement, Madison's family connections, their wedding venue selection. Every sentence reinforced that they'd supported him unconditionally, repeatedly, without question, while they couldn't be bothered to acknowledge a single significant moment in my life. Then my father raised his glass for a toast. "Your brother's promotion was incredible," he said enthusiastically, glancing at Brandon for confirmation. "So, Alex, when are you finally going to settle down and give us something to celebrate?" The table responded with uncomfortable laughter. Even the carving knife in my mother's hand paused mid-motion. Brandon kept his gaze fixed on his plate, too still, too calculated. That revealed everything I needed to know. For years, I would have laughed it off, allowed the barb to penetrate under my skin, pretended the pain didn't exist. But not tonight. Not after everything they'd concealed. I placed my fork down deliberately. "I already did," I said, my voice steady and clear. "Last May. I got married in Portland." The transformation in the room was immediate, like all oxygen had been extracted simultaneously. I waited a moment, allowed the silence to settle, then added, "You all received invitations, certified mail." Forks froze mid-air. Eyes widened with genuine shock. My mother's smile disintegrated. My father blinked repeatedly, as if he couldn't process what he'd heard. Across from me, Brandon's expression remained carefully neutral. That was the indication he knew exactly where this conversation was heading, and he couldn't prevent it. "Alex," my father said carefully, measuring each word, "we never received any invitations, son." There it was, the lie, the instinctive deflection, the narrative they'd constructed without consciously realizing they were constructing it. I felt something inside me solidify, not anger exactly, but absolute clarity. "I anticipated you'd say that," I replied calmly. I reached into my jacket pocket, not rushing, maintaining complete composure, and placed my phone on the table. The screen illuminated, reflecting in the crystal glasses, the candlelight catching its edges like a blade. Every pair of eyes locked onto it. This was the boundary I'd never established before, the line I'd never drawn. The moment I stopped permitting myself to be erased from my own family's narrative. And as I tapped the screen to display the tracking receipts, the truth rose in my chest like a wave, ready to break over everything they'd built. The instant my finger touched the screen, the atmosphere shifted. It wasn't loud or chaotic, it was quiet, in the way storms become quiet immediately before they devastate a landscape. The delivery receipts opened in an organized list. 4 certified mail confirmations, 4 signatures, all marked as received and signed for. I enlarged the first one and rotated the phone so the entire table could observe. The angular, distinctive signature at the bottom was unmistakable to everyone present. Brandon. My mother inhaled sharply, her hand flying to cover her mouth. My father leaned forward like he needed to see the evidence up close or it wouldn't be legitimate. Madison stiffened in her chair, her eyes darting from the screen to her fiancé like someone had suddenly revealed a secret she didn't know he possessed. Brandon didn't move. His face remained completely impassive, controlled. I could feel my pulse accelerating, but my voice emerged calm, deliberately calm. "These were delivered April 15th, I stated. All 4 invitations signed for by Brandon Alexander Mitchell. Dead silence again. But this time it wasn't surprise. It was exposure, raw and undeniable. "Alex," my father whispered hoarsely, this must be some kind of error." "It's not an error," I said, swiping to the next screenshot. "This is the tracking log from the United States Postal Service, certified mail with signature confirmation, all verified, all delivered to this address." I paused, then added quietly, "and all intercepted before anyone else could see them." My mother shook her head vigorously. No, that doesn't make any sense. Brandon would never do something like that." "Please," I said gently, not harshly, just exhausted. "You keep insisting what Brandon wouldn't do, but you never examine what he actually does." That statement landed with impact. My mother froze mid-gesture. Madison finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Brandon, did you sign for these packages?" Brandon blinked, not slowly or thoughtfully, but mechanically, like he was attempting to recalibrate his response. "I don't specifically remember. I sign for mail occasionally, but I didn't see any wedding invitations." I remained silent. I'd learned years ago that silence often communicates more powerfully than any accusation, so I allowed it to permeate the space. My father, now staring intensely at Brandon, said firmly, "You didn't notice 4 packages from your brother around the time you knew he was engaged? You knew he was planning a wedding?" "It's not my responsibility to track everyone's personal mail," Brandon responded defensively, the first fracture in his carefully maintained composure, sharp enough to draw blood. It was precisely the wrong response. My mother reached toward him protectively. "Sweetheart." "No," I interrupted, my voice still controlled. "Let him speak. He's been speaking for years. Everyone else has just been too busy listening." Brandon glared at me with barely concealed hostility. What exactly is that supposed to mean? I didn't answer his question directly. Instead, I swiped to the final screenshot, the email activity log that Sophia had helped me access through the family account. "This," I said quietly, "is the activity log for the family email account that we all share. The wedding announcement email I sent in mid-April was opened from this household, then permanently deleted within minutes." My father's jaw tightened visibly. Who has administrative access to that account? Everyone at the table knew the answer. Everyone had always known the answer. Brandon finally broke, his composure cracking. "I didn't delete anything," he said, too quickly, too defensively. I tilted my head slightly. "Then why does the log show your device ID and IP address?" His mouth opened, closed, opened again like a fish gasping for oxygen. Maybe I clicked it accidentally. I don't know. Why are you attacking me like this? At my own family's Christmas dinner?" "I'm not attacking you," I said calmly. "I'm presenting evidence of what you did." My mother exhaled harshly, her voice rising. "Why would Brandon ever hide your invitations? Why would he sabotage your wedding? That's absolutely ridiculous." There it was, the sentence she'd been refining my entire existence, the defense mechanism she employed for every harm Brandon ever inflicted on me, intentional or otherwise. "Why?" I repeated, looking directly at her. "Because my wedding was in May, his is scheduled for next week." I turned to face Brandon directly. "Because you didn't want anyone discussing mine before yours. You didn't want any attention diverted from your perfect celebration." Brandon flinched as if I'd physically struck him with a truth he'd been desperately trying to outrun. "That's insane," Brandon hissed through clenched teeth. You always manipulate situations to make me look bad. You've always been jealous." "No," I said, voice absolutely steady. "You accomplished that entirely on your own. I'm just finally saying it out loud." Madison's chair scraped loudly against the floor as she stood abruptly. "Brandon, is this true? Did you actually do this?" He stared down at his plate, his breathing becoming irregular. Everyone always assumes Alex is so noble. He never needs anything. He never wants recognition. He just exists quietly and makes everyone feel—" "What?" I asked softly, leaning forward slightly. "Makes everyone feel what, Brandon?" He shot to his feet, his voice rising. "Feel guilty, feel inadequate, like he doesn't even have to try and everyone still thinks he's so goddamn noble and selfless." Ah, there it was, the genuine confession. Not about the invitation specifically, but about every year of resentment that preceded them. I leaned back slightly in my chair. "So you hid my wedding invitations because what exactly? Because my small, quiet ceremony didn't compete with your 400-guest extravaganza with the live orchestra and ice sculpture? That's," he stammered, but the truth was already suspended in the air between us, like smoke that couldn't be cleared. "Alex," my father said desperately, his voice cracking, "we didn't know. If we had known, we absolutely would have." "You would have?" I finished for him, my voice carrying decades of accumulated pain. "After years of missing every milestone that mattered to me, after forgetting birthdays, after ensuring that Brandon's needs always took precedence over everything else?" He closed his eyes, unable to respond. My mother's face contorted with defensive anger. "You cannot place all of that on us. We did our best with both of you." "No," I said firmly. "You did your best for Brandon. For me, you did the absolute minimum and convinced yourselves it was equitable." Brandon sat down abruptly, his shoulders collapsing inward. Even he couldn't defend against that assessment. The weight of decades pressed into my chest, not as grief anymore, but as absolute clarity about who these people actually were. I looked at each of them individually, the people I had begged silently for years to truly see me, to acknowledge my existence as meaningful. And I finally articulated the truth I'd been avoiding my entire life. "I didn't lose my family tonight," I said clearly. "I just stopped pretending I ever really had one." My mother gasped audibly. "Alex, don't you dare speak like that." "Why not?" I responded.
"Because it threatens the narrative you've constructed. The one where Brandon is perfect and successful, Dad is neutral and fair, you're the devoted mother, and I'm just, what? The problem child who should be grateful for whatever scraps of attention you throw my way?" "No one ever said you were a problem," Dad whispered, his voice breaking. "You didn't need to say it," I replied. "You demonstrated it repeatedly through your actions and your silence." Madison sank back into her chair as if watching the foundation of her future marriage rearrange itself into a structure she didn't recognize or want to be part of. Brandon whispered desperately, "Alex, please don't do this." That single word, please, carried years of fear, guilt, and the sudden horrifying realization that his control over the family narrative was disintegrating. I stood slowly, pushing my chair back with a soft scraping sound against the floor. "I'm done begging for a place at this table," I said, my voice firm but not angry. "I'm done asking you to show up for me. I'm done pretending Brandon's actions don't cause real harm. I'm done accepting your silence as anything other than complicity." I took a deep breath. "I'm done with all of it." My father stood too, reaching out toward me. "Alex, please don't leave. We can discuss this, fix this." "We are discussing it," I said, "the first genuine conversation we've had in years, and it's also the last one under these terms." My mother's eyes filled with tears. "We can fix this. We're your family."
You can't fix what you fundamentally refuse to acknowledge, I replied, and you've refused to acknowledge it from my entire life. I picked up my coat, feeling physically lighter with every movement. I pulled it over my shoulders deliberately. As I walked toward the front door, I heard Brandon crying quietly, something I'd never witnessed before. I heard my mother repeating my name like a desperate prayer. I heard my father say brokenly, "We should have checked. We should have asked questions. We should have noticed." But their remorse wasn't my responsibility to manage anymore. Their guilt wasn't mine to absolve. I opened the door, cold December air rushing inside, and paused just long enough to say clearly, "You didn't miss my wedding. You chose not to see it. There's a significant difference." Then I stepped outside into the night, letting the door close behind me. Not loudly or dramatically, just firmly, definitively. A clean, final boundary drawn, and for the first time in my entire life, the silence that followed belonged entirely to me. Sophia was waiting in the car, engine running to keep warm, and opened the door before I even reached it. One look at my face and she didn't ask what happened. She just wrapped her arms around me and held on until the shaking subsided. No questions, no judgment, just presence, something my biological family had never mastered. The next morning, her parents invited us over for a quiet breakfast. No ceremony, no pity, just warm food, genuine conversation, and the kind of attention that doesn't need to be earned or performed for. Jennifer squeezed my hand and said simply, "You're family here, Alex. Not because you married our daughter, but because you matter as a person." A week later, Brandon sent a lengthy email. It was therapeutic in tone, carefully apologetic, admitting more than I anticipated. I read it completely. I didn't respond. My father called every few days after that. Small attempts, careful steps towards something resembling reconciliation. Then he discovered one of my wedding invitations buried in a storage box in the garage, covered in dust, proof of everything I already knew. He mailed it to me with a handwritten note that simply said, "I'm sorry. I should have looked harder. I should have questioned." That was the closest he'd come to an apology that felt genuine, earned. My mother never reached out directly.
And for the first time in my life, that absence didn't feel like a wound that needed healing. It felt like an answer, a clear one. I used to believe family was something you protect unconditionally, regardless of what it cost your own well-being. But standing in my own home now, Sophia cooking dinner while humming, laughter drifting in from friends who choose me consistently, I finally understood the truth that had eluded me for decades. Family isn't determined by who shares your DNA or your last name. It's who shows up when it matters. It's who listens without agenda. It's who stays present even when it's uncomfortable. And sometimes the bravest, most necessary thing you can do is walk away from the people who never learned how to truly hold space for you.